Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Fantasy for the Ages, the show where father and son sit down and talk about fantasy, sci-fi, and whatever other nerdiness we want to talk about today. I'm Jim, the father of this show. My son Zach is not with me on this one, but check around our channel. You'll find plenty of other episodes where Zach is right there by my side. Today, I'm going to talk to you about one of those things that are more in the nerdy side of things as I talk about a TBR, especially mine. More about that in a minute. I am drinking something today. We like to share what we're drinking in our episodes. And, we're talking about books. That's what a TBR is all about. And books are so good and so classic. So I made a classic. This is just a dirty vodka martini. You can see the olives in there. I used Tito's vodka, which I have a leaning towards because they make it in Austin, Texas, where my son now lives. So, I kind of think of him every time I have some Tito's. But not necessarily when I have a dirty vodka martini because he hates the olive brine. No olives for Zach. Oh well, no one can be perfect. All right, let's get to it. And first off, I want to forgive you if you don't know what a TBR is. If you decided to watch this episode because it's called Cultivating a TBR, partly because you're like, and what's that? That's fine. I had no idea until just a couple of years ago what a TBR was. I'd never heard of such a thing. It's genuinely nerdy jargon, gleefully used by those of us who are really into reading books. So you can start using it now, and you will feel like you're in the club. Carrie is with us here in the Discord, one of our Patreon supporters. So here for the live recording, she notes that she learned about it from me, she thinks, from Zach and I, which is great. We're spreading the knowledge. I'm pretty sure I learned about it from other podcasters. So it works. Now, why would you use a TBR? What fun is there in a TBR? Okay, if you're the kind of person who A, likes to read, B, likes to make goals and have aspirations for what you'd like to do in the future, a TBR is right up your alley. Especially if you like to make plans and you really nerd out about being organized about that planning. Oh yeah, totally. And I am both of those. Case in point, I bought a library application for my computer so I could catalog all the books, physical, digital, audio, that I own. I spent hours putting them all into my library application because I found it fun. I never go back and look at it anymore. I did it. So I know I have it all. Now it's horribly outdated again because I don't keep up with it. But it was an accomplishment, and I felt very good about knowing how many I had. All right. So a TBR, let's lay it out here. It stands for to be read. It is your to be read list. The list of books you've come across that you'd like to read someday. Some people, like my son Zach, may have as many as 10 books waiting on the TBR. Books he knows he'll be getting to in the near future. Whereas at the current moment, as I was planning for this episode, I added one more book to my TBR. So now I have 1,124 books on the list. And I've heard of people who have longer ones than that. Okay, I don't even compare to some people's TBRs. So why would anyone create a TBR? Well, very practical reasons. In the past, I would buy books that interested me, planning to get to them someday, and then I would forget I had them by the time I'm picking another book to read. Heck, I have a whole episode on this channel about the physical books I recently found in my home library that I've never read, that I had no idea were still there. And they weren't on my TBR. Of course, I've corrected that now. On top of this, some books I just hear about from others and think, oh yeah, that sounds good. But I didn't buy them at the time, and unless I stumbled upon them later and remembered, "Oh, yeah, so and so told me about that," I'd never get that book. That's a missed opportunity for good literature. Putting them on your TBR captures them for a later time. Carrie's TBR right now, Wheel of Time. If you've read The Wheel of Time, you understand that's a chunk right there. Fair. One of the pre TBR challenges for me as an avid reader was deciding what to read next, because that's a commitment. I don't like not finishing something. So if I'm going to read something, I want to be sure it's what I want to read, and it's going to be great, a great book, a great trilogy, a great series. I mean, what if I pick something that's lame? I just wasted time when I could have been reading something better. What if there was something I would have preferred reading, but I didn't think of it until I was already on a different book now that, oh man, that's right, I wanted to read that thing over there. A TBR takes the challenge away. When I finish a book, I can go to my list and simply move on to the next thing on the list. It's quick and easy. There's no hassle in deciding what do I want to read now. And I mean, for me, the hassle was real in the past, and not just for books. Back when people would go to the video store, if you're old enough, you know what I'm talking about. You'd go to pick out a movie like on a Friday night. If you're going to take it, watch it at home. I was one of those people who would go through the newer movie selection, start at A, had to work my way all the way across the store to Z. I'd pick up a movie as I'm going along. Oh, this looks good. But then I'd find something better later, go back, put the other one down. Now I've got this one. And whatever I still had in my hand at the end of the line, okay, I am settled. Although I might have to go check the sci-fi section, the fantasy section, or the horror section too, just to see, is there something there I want to watch now? It was easily 30 minutes every time I went to the video store, just so I could go home finally and have something to watch. These days, this still plays out when I decide to stream something at random. Hey, let's watch a movie, dear. Going through all the options: HBO, Prime Video, Hulu, Netflix, Peacock, Disney Plus, Apple, Paramount Plus. Ah, I thought cable cutting would be easy. It's still an exhausting process to settle on just what do I want to watch. So at least with a TBR, I have gained some control over my life. It's a real time saver, and it has enhanced the pleasure in my reading choice experience. So let's talk about cultivating the TBR, because my process is, for me, a thing of beauty. I have my TBR set up as a spreadsheet on my computer, saved in the cloud so I can see it on my phone and my iPad. It's accessible anytime I want and easy for me to use. Every book I've come across that I think I'd like to read is on that list. As I talk about how I work and use this list, I'm just tossing out things that might be suggestions for you, things you might try to do, but I'm not trying to say my way or the highway. Okay, this is just the way that works for me to do a TBR. If you have other ideas, ways you actually run a TBR that are very different, I'd love to hear. Maybe it's something I can adapt. But here, the rest of this episode, I'm going to break this down into 4 things to talk about with my TBR. And the first one will be the longest section, where I talk about how I use this list when it's time to choose a new book. But I'll also talk about how a book gets on the list in the first place. And actually, now that I think about it, that will be the longest section of the episode. Then a couple short things. I'll talk about how I actually record the books on the list. How do they actually go on there? What does it look like? And finally, how I manage the list over time, the real cultivating. So let's get to how I use the list when it's time to choose a new book. This is the best part of the reading selection experience. Some of you already know this about me. I typically am reading 3 different books at the same time at any given time, because I read in 3 different formats. I'm always, perfect example. Tell you what I'm reading right now. In physical book, I've got a paperback that I'm reading, The Chronicles of Pern, First Fall by Anne McCaffrey. This is my least favorite method of reading a book these days. But I already own a bunch of physical books. This is a reread for me. So this book was on the shelf. I'm not going to buy it again in a different format. I'm going to read the paperback. But I don't tend to buy books this way anymore. Then we move on to my second version, which is an ebook. The Kindle app is my preferred method to read on my iPad or my iPhone. I've read some books on Apple's iBook app. I've also read some on the Barnes and Noble Nook app. But really, my preference is Kindle. It's just what I like, what I'm comfortable with. So currently, I'm working through The Altar of My Fate, book one of the Rostival saga by Michael R. Schultheis. And then I'm also listening to an audiobook. So that makes my third thing at the same time. At the moment, I'm listening to book 6 of the Codex Alera series. So that's the last book of Jim Butcher in this epic fantasy series. It's called First Lord's Fury. And I'm almost done. Literally, I could be listening right now instead of recording this and finish the book. So tomorrow, maybe later tonight. We'll see. When I finish any of these books, here's what I do. I go to the TBR and I see what's at the top of the list. There's a number 1, okay? Spreadsheet. Carrie says spreadsheets are sexy. Yeah, there you go. Ooh, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's elegant. It's simple. It's easy. So here at the top of the list, I look and see, okay, if I just finished First Lord's Fury, which book is the next book on this list that I intended to read in ebook format? And that's how I'll pick a book. It's that simple. So it might not be the first book on the list because I might already own it in physical copy or something, but I'm going to go down just as far as I can get to the book in that format. They're not marked as to what format I have them on my list. I just know when they're at the top of the list, I've already decided how I'm reading them and probably already have them. So I can actually break that down just a little further. I can tell you right now, when I do finish First Lord's Fury, I have Terminus, book 6 in the Lee Harden series, already waiting in my Audible library. It's right up there at the list. I've read everything else of the series, so I'm going to read this last one in audio. Whenever I consider an audiobook, I do check with the public library. If they have a digital copy, I'll get it from there. But the Lee Harden series is not available in that way, so I bought it. When I finish that paperback of the Chronicles of Pern, First Fall, I'll go grab my paperback copy of the next book, The Dolphins of Pern. Just moving through that series. I already have a bunch of these. Now, I have some I'll get to that I don't own in hard copy, and I will switch over to digital when I get there. And when I finish The Altar of My Fate on my Kindle app, well, Gardens of the Moon, book 1 of Stephen Erickson's Malazan Book of the Fallen, is sitting in my Kindle library waiting for me. I actually got that one a while back when the publisher offered a free ebook. I went, yes, because I was planning to read it. It was already in my TBR. I'll talk more about that later. But so it's sitting there waiting, and I'm almost ready to start. Okay, easy peasy because of my TBR. Now, how does a book get on the TBR in the first place? Fair question. And there are many different ways books appear here. Some of them are books that I've just wanted to read for quite a while. So when I created the TBR on my spreadsheet a couple of years ago, I first populated it with books I knew I was going to read. Just mental list. I didn't have them marked anywhere, but I put all those down, spewed them out of my brain. Now I didn't have to remember anymore. I've come upon many books to add to the TBR by listening to podcasts. I mean, Zach and I are content creators now, and we share our own content and recommendations, as Carrie's here waiting for. But I was a regular podcast listener the year prior to starting my own. So many of my first additions to the TBR came from what I heard from podcasts I was following, and I'll give them shout outs here. The Legendarium podcast, Fantology, Friends Talking Fantasy, and Inking Out Loud. Those were some that I was really faithful in listening to and got a lot of book suggestions. Books that are on the TBR. That's where I learned about Malazan, for example, that I'm about to start. Now, I don't follow as many podcasts because I spend all my time making episodes for our YouTube channel and audio podcast, but I collaborate with other content creators. So I do still learn from them directly. Like, well, many of the books I've added in the last year have come from Spencer over at the Fantasy Files. We've teamed up a number of times and we've talked to books we like, and he knows ones I haven't heard of, and I've shared some back the other way. So, still getting it from other content creators. Carrie asks in the Discord, does my TBR have categories by genre? I'm going to save that question because that's coming up in the next category. So, good question. I will get to that. As a content creator, and especially as someone involved with the Wheel of Time fandom, I've made a bunch of friends who love books. So, just other people I'm chatting with now will tell me things they've read and liked, and those go on my TBR if it at all sounds interesting. Like The Expanse was something I read last year, totally loved, sucked it down, and I heard about it from somebody just I was talking to who I've met through the fandom. Part of that fandom connection with people is on Twitter. If you've fled from Twitter because it's too scary, you're kind of missing out. It's working fine still. Come back. Being active on Twitter has gotten me plenty of book suggestions, including actually some requests from independent authors to, hey, try my book, read my book. I know in the past year, I've read 6 different books, gotta hold the fingers up, right, that were done by indie authors. And one of them, The Trials of Ashmount, one of the best books I've read in the past year. Loved it. Book 1 of a series that he's still writing. He's about to come out with book 2, John Palladino. Love that book. Can't wait for the next book. And it's not on my TBR yet because it's not published, but as soon as it is, it goes to the top of the list, man. I got to read that book. Others I've read that way, I liked some of them and others I didn't. I'm an optimistic, positive person. So if I don't like a book, you just don't hear about it much from me. I might say something on Twitter, but then I'm over it and done. And I don't podcast about those because what I don't like, other people might like. And I respect that. I don't want to diss somebody else's work. A book has to really suck for me to go off on it. And I don't read many books like that to start with. So if I don't like it, I just don't mention it. Moving on. I've got 5 other things listed here. I told you the biggest section of how books get in my TBR. So another one is simply my son. Zach and I, we talk literature. We're into this stuff. So some of the things I've added to my TBR were first recommendations from him. I've done it the other way too. I think he's got more recs from me than the other way simply because I've read a lot more. It helps to be 29 years older. He's got the pulse of things I may not be paying attention to, so I've appreciated everything I've picked up from him. Now, here's a gem that I've gotten a lot of things over the years for my TBR and things that aren't on there now because I've already read them. I subscribe to BookBub, BookBub. BookBub. You can find them, you can Google them. It's a free service that sends me a daily email of book deals that I might enjoy. You can select your preference of book format. I have them set as I like Kindle books. So it only sends me ones that are deals for new Kindle books I could get. Now, they're not all new. Some of them are established books, but everything that comes out, the deal of the day, they'll be like $3.99 or less in US dollars. I don't know if this is available outside the US, but you can check. They may have versions of it in other countries. They probably do. Most of the books that I get deals for are $1.99 or less, and some of them are free. That's right, free. The free ones, that doesn't mean they're bad books. Nobody will buy it, so we're giving it away. Often these are like book 1 of a series, and the author has authorized a deal to give the first one away, hoping you get sucked in, and then you'll buy the rest. And of course, the author benefits because when you buy a free book, it still shows up as a purchase. So the numbers for that author are going up. It's a win-win right there. There have been some I've picked up that way that were like, "Ah, okay, well, I don't need to read the rest of that. That's not very good." But, it was free. Others have been gems, diamonds in the rough, where I've enjoyed some good literature that way. I do usually only get the free ones. The exception being if I come upon a deal on something that's already in my TBR somewhere. I'm planning to read it eventually, and now it's only a buck 99 or 99 cents. Heck yeah. And I'll grab that book then. So, BookBub, check it out. I've also added to my TBR, and this is nerdy, I'm telling you, by simply scrolling through best book lists online. Like I'll look up lists of best epic fantasy books from the 1980s, best grimdark recommendations, or best zombie apocalypse reads you should consume. Take a bite out of. But I've also scanned lists of book awards over the years. The award winners for different fantasy awards or sci-fi awards, and I'll review the top books in those categories and see, okay, are some of these ones I haven't read that maybe I would like to, and I'll add them to the TBR. On our Discord, here's another way. We have a channel called Reading Now. And everybody who's with us, as they're reading through things, they're posting what they're reading and what they thought of it. No spoilers, just basic reactions. I've picked up a bunch of books in my TBR from these people with us on Discord, because we have people who read like crazy and so diverse in the things they like. I'm learning of books I maybe never would have come across. And sometimes just affirming where, oh, yeah, I've got that on my TBR. Glad you liked it. I'm glad it's on my list. And finally, I run the Try Reader Twitter tournament every other month on various types of books, different categories that we do these tournaments on. And I've learned about a bunch of great books from those who've submitted entries for the tournament. I have stolen all of those books. Anything I wasn't familiar with, I check it out. If it looks like it might be my kind of thing, thwomp, onto the TBR. Carrie mentions that she often reads a book by an author and then immediately wants to read everything that author has. That's a good point. That's a way I will self add to my TBR if I have come across something in whatever way by a new author. And if I liked it, yeah, I definitely go check out what else has this author written and will add more to my TBR. Now, relevant to that, I should mention two more things about how books get put on the list. So, when I add a book to my list that comes from a series, I add the entire series. In some cases, that's been over 30 books at once. They all show up. So that is part of how this thing's blown up to over 1,100 books. Will I ever read the entire series that I just added? Well, that depends on my experience with the first book I added. If it's horrible, then no. But if I liked it, yeah, I'm going to keep reading. And as long as the series remains good, even if it's just okay, I'll probably tough it out because once I start something, I do like to finish. As we were talking about there, Carrie, if it's an author that I came across and then I check out, oh, I like this author, what other books are out there? I may find other series by the author and I'll put them somewhere on the TBR. Not necessarily the next thing I read, but you're right. I like that author. I'm going to see where I can put other things by that author. So this plays into the last thing to say about how books get on the list. A book is rarely added at the bottom. I gauge my general interest for the book or series that I'm adding, and I place it somewhere on the list based on how I happen to feel about it at that moment. Not very scientific or mathematical. It's just, where do I want to stick it? Sometimes I'm really excited about it, and so it'll be added near the top where I'm likely to maybe read it in the next year or two. Most are going somewhere else along the list. I read about 100 books a year is kind of my pace. So if it gets placed somewhere in the top 200, that's a good sign. I'm going to get to that book. It's not going to be too long. I'm going to enjoy it. If it's somewhere else on the list, well, I was still interested. So it's on there. It has a shot. It's all relative. The farther down the list, the less likely it'll ever see the top, but it still made the list. Carrie had asked earlier about do I list genre or such on the list. So let me tell you about how I actually record the books on the list. And it's pretty simple. When I add a book to the list, all I do is list four pieces of information. One, I list the date I'm putting it on the list. This is just an interest thing for me later. Like I'm about to start Malazan, Book of the Fallen, and I can see I added it about 2 years ago. So I've got my TBR open here to the side here. So I look and it says April 30th, 2021. So not quite 2 full years ago that I added it. So it's been waiting for me to get to it for almost 2 years. That only increases the excitement that I'm finally about to read it. The other book that I mentioned, I'm about to read on audio, Terminus. I can look at that one here and it says January 20th, 2023. So I added that just over a month ago. Why is that way at the top then? Is it that good? Uh, it's zombie apocalypse literature. It's eclectic as to who likes that kind of thing. It's at the top of my list because I had enjoyed most of the series in the past and then found just recently that last year the series was finished. But this final book finally came out, and I was like, well, I want to finish a series. So, boom, up to the top. So, I've got the date. Okay. Also, on here, I have added the title. I add the series. Now, not all books that are on the list are part of a series, so that's blank in those cases. But I mentioned I include complete series. Now, I mean that I include complete series because I'll research it. I'll go and check Goodreads. That's very helpful. I'll also double check sometimes with Amazon if Goodreads is perhaps a little unclear. Sometimes I'll go to an author's webpage or Wikipedia to look up, okay, all the books, because I want it all when I add it. And not just the books, I want the novellas, I want the short stories, anything written in this author's universe here. I want to get in here and I want it in publication order. That's the way I like to consume things. So my TBR has it all laid out and it will note if it's a novella or a short story. That's an extra thing I've added in after the title. And of course, the final thing that's on the list is the author. You got to know who wrote it or authors. Sometimes there's multiple authors. Carrie, you are completely right. She says this reminds her of the old Netflix queue when you used to get the discs in the mail and rearranging it all the time. Yes, because that's my next category where I'm going to say now how I manage the list. It's exactly like my old Netflix queue because I did the same thing, Carrie. Same thing. I had so much fun moving things up and down the list or adding it in and sticking it where I want it. So managing my TBR is a lot of the pleasure. I move things up the list all the time. When someone recommends a book or series to me, I'll go check my TBR to see do I have it already on the list? If not, I add it. But if it's already there, I usually will move it up because I'm hearing good things about it again. I'm more excited about it now. Good example for that is Fonda Lee's Green Bone Saga. I'd added that to my list a while back. It was down like in the 500s, and now it was down to the 600s because of things I'd added ahead of it. But I've been hearing a lot of good about it, but not just good, good along the lines of I think I would like it. I think I definitely want to get to that. So it's moved up a number of hundreds. It's definitely in the this will see the light of day range on my TBR now. I don't think I've ever moved something down my list. Like, why is that so high? And boom, dropped it down. It's not how I tend to use my TBR. But things certainly drop because other things are leapfrogging or just more things brand new are being put ahead of them. So things are dropping down the list all the time, just naturally. It's organic. I'm not picking on a book or dissing it. And because I keep series together, sometimes things drop precipitously. I mean, like, all right, as an example, I added not too long ago Simon Green's Night Side series. I own the first three of these, bought them years ago, never read them. But kind of, again, when I was looking at books I have that I've never read, I was like, why haven't I read these? I think I would like these. There's a lot of urban fantasy, Jim Butcher-ish type stuff. Not that he necessarily writes like Jim Butcher, but they're in the same genre. And they've collaborated a bit. They've been in some short story collections together. I'm like, I definitely should give those a try. So I went and looked. I own three. And I went, oh, wow, there's like over 20 of these. So they're all on the list, and everything below them dropped over 20 books, just like that. So that is how it works. Managing this TBR for me is critical because let's face it, book 1124 is never going to get read. I won't make it that long. I told you, I read about 100 books a year. So theoretically, give me 11 years, 12 years, I'm through the list. But I keep adding things to the list, and they nearly never go to the bottom. It sucks to be 1124. In fact, you're better off not being on my TBR than being at the bottom of the list, because if you're not on the list, someday you might get added, and there's a good chance you're going to be somewhere higher than the bottom. You have a better chance. I do want to go back to genre. Carrie had asked the question, and I said I'd touch on it. I don't list genre on my TBR because I remember genre. So when I look at these books later, every last one of them, I remember why I added them to the list. Even ones that have been there for 2+ years, I remember why they're there. So I can look at any book on here and I can say, oh, yeah, that's fantasy, that's grimdark, that's sci fi, that's something different, that's a little horror or supernatural. As I scan the list right now, there's nothing in here where I'm like, I don't remember what that is. Nope, it's all there. I also don't include year because I kind of generally remember. I'm looking at Ursula K. Le Guin's The Earthsea Quartet. Okay, I know that's classic fantasy that goes back a ways. It's on my list because I never read it. I'll get there eventually, maybe. Oh, one that I added last month, The Legend of Drizzt, R.A. Salvatore. That's one that's over 30 books. Made some other book series very sad when they plummeted. Carrie wants to know if she gets to see this famous TBR. I've actually shared it before with people. I made it into a graphic that I could put on Twitter, and you needed a microscope to see the whole thing. But yeah, I may go ahead and put it into a format on our Discord where people could access it. Because why not? Maybe I can even figure out how to share it in a way that you can actually see it organically as it changes. I bet I could figure that out. Most importantly, I do want people to know what's on the TBR because you can help me make it better. I'm going to give you right now some examples of that. So when you watch this episode, give me some feedback on a few of these in particular. Like I've told you, it sucks to be at the bottom of the list. So here's what's at the bottom of my list. Tell me if I'm wrong, if I should be moving this up. I've got Taryn Matherew's Summoner series and Contender series. Both of those all the way at the bottom. They look like I maybe should read them, but I wasn't. Yes, I must read them when I added it to the list, so they went to the end. What else? Okay, let me give you a few others. Just kind of comparisons. I've got Pierce Brown's Red Rising series, 10 spots ahead of Scott Lynch's Gentleman Bastard series. Both of those are in the next 12-month range. I'm definitely getting to those sooner rather than later. But is the order right? Does Red Rising belong ahead of Gentleman Bastard? You tell me. I've got Dan Simmons' Hyperion Cantos, just ahead of Peter F. Hamilton's Commonwealth Saga, Void Trilogy, and The Chronicle of the Fallers. So 3 different series there, but they all flow together. It made sense to put them like that. Both of these are classic authors. But should Hyperion Cantos be ahead of Hamilton's work? Or should it be the other way around? Classic fantasy fans have heard of David Gemmell. I've got his Drenai series that I never read right smack in the center of my TBR. Right there in the late 600s range. Is that right? Is that too far down? Is it a crime I never read those? One more. Near the end of my TBR, not the very end, I already told you it was at the very end, but near the end is the lengthy Vorkosigan saga by Lois McMaster Bujold. I'm not sure how she pronounces that last name. It's long. I learned about it at a recent Try Reader tournament. Did I put it down too far? Should that be much higher up because it's deserving and worthy? Literature is all subjective. I know you guys will have ideas about these things, and I could ask 10 people who know all these books and get 10 different orders for how they go, but I want your comments. Let me know. You can put them down in the show notes here. You can join us on Discord, which is, links for Discord and all our social media things are right here listed with the YouTube video. If you're listening on audio, you can find it in the notes that came with the audio episode. Connect with us. Discord, Twitter, Facebook, Mastodon, the common places, and let us know. We even put our email out there, so you can just email me. Here's the list you should have, Jim, and I want to see what you think. Any other questions, Carrie? You said, what happens once you read them? Is there a finish list? That's a fantastic question. Once I read them, they don't belong on a to be read list. They belong on a read list. I do have a read list. Goodreads. I maintain an active Goodreads list. You can find me, I believe it's just looking up Jim Scriven on Goodreads. I don't think it's a Fantasy for the Ages one because it's only my books, it's not Zach. But all the books that I've read over time that I remember are on that list. There's a lot of books. I'm focusing on the fantasy and the sci-fi and just a few other things I threw in there. There's certainly other books I've read that aren't on my Goodreads, but all the ones you'll care about, they're there. You can find all the things I've read all listed there. Some of them I've even put reviews for. Great question. I should have thought of that and put it in the notes in the first place. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. That's really all I have for you today. I encourage you, try out a TBR, even if it's only like Zach and it's only the next 10 books. Do the planning. Be intentional of what you're going to read next time. Don't be afraid to say, hey, I've got this list of 100 books, but I just found a new one and I want to read that now. You control the list. It doesn't control you. All right. Thanks for being here, Carrie. Thanks for joining us. And we'll talk to you next time.